This is Wendy Halley, and you're listening to Lucid Cafe. Hey, thanks for joining me for another episode of Lucid Cafe, a podcast exploring healing, consciousness, and the complexities of being human. Well, since I've been a bit delayed in releasing this episode, I'm going to get right to it. So much to do, so little time. I'll have an update about the introductory online Become Your Own Shaman course that's scheduled to be released later this summer in the next episode. All right, so I enjoyed my conversation with today's guest, Kim Chestney, very much. She's the author of Radical Intuition and the Psychic Workshop. In this episode, we discuss her new book, The Illumination Code, 7 Keys to Unlock Your Quantum Intelligence, which looks at intuition through the lens of quantum physics. We take some deep dives into fun and intriguing territory in this conversation. A little bit more about Kim. As the founder of IntuitionLab and the Create Festival, Kim's work raises awareness about the importance of insight in the evolution of individual and world consciousness. Working for nearly 20 years in the tech sector, she's led initiatives with some of the top thought leaders, technology companies, and universities in the world. So please enjoy my conversation with Kim Chestney. Well, Kim, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, it's great to be here, Wendy. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So you seem to have quite an intense relationship with intuition.
I love that. That is really well put. And I've speculated about that myself. Yes, I'm very passionate about intuition and I have been for most of my life. And this book that's come out now, The Illumination Code, is really the culmination of all of my passion and research and exploration from the past 30 years.
Yeah. So you referenced your new book. It's called The Illumination Code, 7 Keys to Unlock Your Quantum Intelligence, which sounds very inviting and very fancy. You're taking intuition into a new direction with this book, right? Not taking it into a new direction. It seems like you're trying to explain what intuition is all about, like the science behind it.
Yeah. And I think, that's one of the things about my work is that I've always tried to sort of push the understanding of intuition to the next level. When my very first book came out in 2004, The Psychic Workshop, I was really part of that initial wave of really helping people to understand that psychic ability is normal and a part of our design. You don't have to be born with some superpower to develop your psychic ability / intuition. We're really talking about the same thing. And as my works progress, moving into using intuition in every single part of life, I've really sort of branched out, and like Radical Intuition, my last book, really talked about how to integrate it in daily life for normal people. And you don't have to, to go out and be all woo-woo and do all crazy stuff, right? And then once people started reading that book, one of the biggest questions I got when people really started seeing this stuff happen and work in their life and experience the magic of intuition for themselves, the biggest question was, how is this actually working? If you have a thought and your friend calls you at the same time, like, wow, that's a coincidence, but how is that working? When you know something is going to happen and then it comes true, well, how is that actually working, right? So we knew that intuition worked. People have known for centuries that intuition has worked. It's just never been able to be explained until the quantum revolution. So 200 years ago, people would have to talk about these impossible things or these mysteries and call them occult or call them the unexplained because we had no understanding of the quantum dimension. But now, with the advent of technology and computers and quantum physics, we're starting to understand this whole sort of different level of the world in a microcosmic way. And now suddenly there's a place for intuition, a real scientific place for intuition, but also a place that's very normal and personal for each of us in our everyday life.
Okay, so as you were doing your research to try to discover what is the science behind intuition, What would you say was the most surprising discovery you made?
Well, I think it was definitely when I read Irving Laszlo's book, Science in the Akashic Field, which is a book that completely changed my understanding of intuition and just blew my mind. And what that is all about is something called the non-local field. If you don't know what that is, and it's becoming more and more popularized, this idea, but still a lot of people don't know that really science and quantum physics have proven that there is a sort of invisible 0 point field that connects all things. Right. So we live in a world, a material world, where we think everything's separate and disconnected. There's an object over there. You're over there. I'm over here. But really, we're all connected by an invisible sea of energy and information, like an invisible internet that is a web across of all of existence. So suddenly, when these separated objects, we find out they can communicate, or things like telepathy, things like synchronicity, all of these things start to make sense, because it's not that we're two separate things that can't interact. We're interacting on this super conscious level via our intuition. So this understanding of this field, this beautiful sea of information and energy that's intuition read, right? It's meant to be read by our intuition. We connect with it. We use it via our intuition. Really shows how important intuition is in human evolution, the human expansion of consciousness, and what a vital part of reality it plays.
What's really interesting to me as I was reading your book was how you describe this web, right? And that other cultures have had similar descriptions of this place, this energetic realm, which we're now referring to as the quantum realm.
Mm-hmm.
I have a long time shamanic practice, and the foundation of it is in Hawaiian or Polynesian shamanism. And the Hawaiians would call that field the Aka field.
Interesting that it's like Akashic, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Yeah,
cool.
you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, how we're all connected by these, they would call it like there are these threads that connect all of us, and that's how we're able to know who's on the phone before we pick it up. And I'm not referring to looking at the caller ID. I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
that's cheating. But like you were referencing before, knowing something before it happens, that information is there for us all the time, right? And that's what you're referencing. But why do you think it's so challenging for people to tap into this?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's really just a rediscovery of ancient concepts, like you were saying. Like today, we're kind of conditioned out of our intuition. We're coming out of the information age, the age of materialism, where we think we have to, seeing is believing, touching is believing. Well, now we're realizing there's a whole nother dimension. So part of this shift that we have to make in our minds to use intuition is letting go of some of that conditioning that we live in a world of physical objects. We now know that matter is really an illusion. It's just another form of energy, right? And not just that we're all connected, but we're all part of energy that's connected. We're not even just material objects. Like that whole thing has gone out the window. So there's a saying, and I forget who said it. One of the great physicists said that if quantum physics has not profoundly shocked you, you don't understand it yet. Because it changes the way you see the reality. You can't look at the world the same way again. So understanding that we don't live in a physical world, we live in a world of energy. We're not all separate. We're all connected. This is science now, right? And science is hearkening back to those early texts and ancient wisdom that came up through the East and through the scriptures, and all of these things that we've sort of said, oh, that's spirituality, and put it in a different container, is now really wrapped up into physics in a very practical, no nonsense way. So I think it's a beautiful circle, a beautiful return to our origins. But now this time we come so far and we have a higher perspective. And it's really an opportunity for us to open our minds, to start to see the world a new way, and really start to rediscover the wonder and mystery of life.
Right. So it sounds like you're inviting people to understand the quantum realm by making it accessible in your book, and thereby understanding that information is available, like I was saying before, available to you at all times. It's just a matter of accessing it. And you're saying our beliefs or our cultural worldview is preventing us from accessing that. Yeah?
One of the many things. There's
Yeah.
more than just that. And that's one of the things that we have working against us. In the West, intuition isn't nurtured and fostered the way it is in the East. The East, it's a different conversation. My friends in the East are very, very naturally attuned to their intuition. And it hasn't gotten to the place like over here where it's sort of like poo-pooed, or, oh, it's just your imagination, or we can't really count on that or rely on it. So I find myself in the West really constantly having to keep proving myself and proving intuition to people because there's a barrier and there's a resistance to it. But in the East, it's not that way as much. Things like astrology, things like intuition are really more widely accepted. But so in the West, we have to sort of open our minds to these new ideas in this shift, but we also have to really slow down a little bit more. We're so busy here. We have a really toxic lifestyle in terms of balancing our energy and finding those peaceful times with our busy times. We're usually in a state of overwhelm, always looking at our phones when we're not. So we're in this culture where we're addicted to the mind. We're addicted to sort of overthinking in a way that's really suppressive to our intuition. Our intuition comes in the moments of stillness and peace and quiet. You don't have to do anything to get your intuition. You don't have to go get a PhD to use it. All you really have to do is open up and receive it and learn to recognize it when it speaks to you. So really the biggest first step, I always tell people when you start to really want to like lean into your intuition, is to make more white space in your calendar. Take more time alone. My favorite thing to say is do nothing like it's your job, right? Because everyone feels so guilty, right? About doing nothing. Like, oh, I'm just going to go spend some time by myself today, or go for a walk, or go for a bike ride, or treat myself to a bath or a nice hot shower where I can just relax and unwind. All of these things they're more than self-care, right? This is also something that opens us up to that higher part of ourself when those insights can drop in and those little bits of intuition can just drop in from the field and connect us in a way that when we're busy running around, it just doesn't get through all that static of our mind.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think I think we must have come to the conclusion unconsciously, collectively, that our brains, our minds have the answers.
Yes.
It's like, if I can just problem solve my way out of this shit, I'll be all right. Everything will be okay. And yeah, it kind of closes the door, doesn't it, to
Yes.
being able to tap into this. And it's interesting. It's kind of ironic if you think about it, that we're getting in our own way because we think we know the right way to do things by thinking it through, problem solving it, as I was saying. But your mind is limited.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. We get in our own way. I love how you phrase that. The harder we try to figure things out, the less we actually get in touch with that true wisdom that's going to give us the perspective we need and the answers we need. So yeah, so getting out of that headspace of linear thinking. And I really tell people it's really learning to think a different way. So it's sort of retraining our brain to think with our intuition first. So our linear mind is really great. Don't get me wrong. It's really important that we develop that sort of thinking mind that is very intelligent and can solve problems and can really do all the great things that we've accomplished in the world today. But what we don't realize, and this is the big problem, is while our minds make us very smart and help us to, like I said, to solve problems, but our intuition is the key to our genius. Right. So that's the complementary nature. Our intuition and our intellect should complement each other, because you can be as smart as you want, but if you don't know how to innovate, create new things, get in touch with the creative flow, trust yourself, bring down these new ideas from the heavens, from the field, if you can't do any of that, you're just going to be following other people. You're just going to keep doing what everybody else does. Intuition is the secret to genius and innovation and ingenuity and all of these things we need to move our lives forward, to move our cultures forward, to make the world a better place. So intuition is always there for us, helping us to expand and grow and create new things. And that's why you have the greatest people in history. You look at the things they say, and they're advocates of intuition. Einstein, people like Tesla, Steve Jobs, people who have done amazing things, apart from all the spiritual people that know it, right? These are just scientists and business people who've recognized it, that it is so valuable in everything we do, whether it's our relationships, our businesses, our spiritual connection, our health. Intuition is there for us. We just have to learn how to listen to it and get our minds out of the way. Once we get that intuitive insight and that nudge and that feeling and that knowing, then we use our really smart brains to figure out how to put it into action and manifest it.
Yeah, all of the names you just mentioned, that they would reference probably their intuitive insight to their discoveries, right?
Yep.
It wasn't something they thought into being.
Right. Like Einstein, he's the best example. Arguably the most intelligent human to ever live on this planet. And again and again and again, he referenced intuition. And he talks about his biggest moments when he had those epiphanies. Well, they came either in the middle of the night when he woke up and in a flash of insight, it dropped into his head, right? Or he's sitting rocking in a rocking chair on his front porch being aimless. That's his term. He said his best ideas come to him when he was aimless. And that's the key to intuition, being aimless, just being, opening your mind, letting those ideas drop in, those thought experiments he would have. It's about opening up to the creative flow and using his imagination. All of the things that most scientists, most, sort of people, everyday people in this age who are successful would say, we don't need. But in reality, we need that most. It's what makes us extraordinary. We can be really smart and do good things, or we can trust our intuition and we can do extraordinary things.
Well said. So I think the big challenge, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is let's say someone has an intuitive hit and then they question it and they doubt it.
Hello, every person on the planet, right? We've all been.
Right. And so how many amazing things have gone by the wayside because we dismissed it?
Yeah, hindsight's always 20/20 with intuition, right? The famous last words, I should have listened to my intuition. But the good news about that are those moments when you don't listen to your intuition can be the greatest teachers and validation of your intuition. Because what better time do you get validation that your intuition was right than when you don't follow it and something goes wrong, right? So you're like, that was my intuition talking to me. That's what my intuition feels like. So next time you can pay attention for that feeling. And if you get it, next time we'll follow it. So the idea with that whole sort of process is to fail forward. The problem is we haven't been trained to understand our intuition. No one explains what it is. It's just this weird thing that happens and we don't know if we can trust it. So why would we listen to it? It sounds crazy to listen to it. It doesn't make any sense, right? It's not rational. Intuition's not rational. It'll tell us to do things that don't make any sense half the time. So it's, of course, we don't listen to it. So that's part of like sort of my crusade is to, it feels like a crusade, like, to give people the tools to recognize and understand and trust their own intuition so that they can make those decisions and they don't have to keep failing forward like I had to do, fumbling your way through the dark with this intuition until you finally figured out. I spent 30 years doing this work, figuring out, like systematizing this, because intuition is learnable and it's repeatable. It's all those things. People think it isn't, but it is. So I saved you the trouble. You can just read the book and then just kind of, adapt it to your own personal intuitive sensibilities, because everybody's a little bit different. But it really is just a process of learning to pay attention and learning how your own intuition speaks to you.
Right. I was just thinking that your approach is really, especially this most recent book, The Illumination Code, is really designed for those of us from the Western world, where you're appealing to our intellect to try to convince us that it is real by showing it through quantum mechanics.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that I wanted to be able to, actually sat down with my publisher and my agent, and we talked about like how do we get this message through to like everyone, men, right? Because like women love radical intuition. That book was just very heart-centered, and we just eat it up. But like men, they're still a little afraid of that word intuition. It's like a word that a lot of men don't feel comfortable with. Not all men. I'm not making any generalizations.
There is something to that. Yep.
But there are men who are just really largely, right, just sort of adverse to that. So we kind of came up with this idea to go down this sort of rabbit hole with quantum physics, which I've been talking about for years anyway. And it's really since I've always loved physics. I minored in it in college. Like
no kidding. All right.
Passion for it. Because I felt it like others. I read the Tao of Physics when I was in college, and I realized that that there's this beautiful intersection of science and mysticism, and that always compelled me. So it's always been part of my fabric of understanding of intuition, but I thought this was really the time to dig in and really, really make a case for it as a part of our quantum intelligence. And that's what the title of the book is about. Intuition, in my mind and my understanding, and I've actually, when I was writing the book, I worked with a number of different physicists on this, is really a quantum function. And when we wrap our minds around that and understanding that, everyday thinking is how we think in this linear reality, We live in a reality of ones and zeros. Everything here is on and off, opposites, duality. So, of course, linear thinking works. But when we get down to the deeper level, the deep dimension within us, the eternal dimension, right? The dimension that exists beyond this physical reality, that reality does not operate in ones and zeros. It operates in a quantum way. And that's where our intuition thrives. So, our intuition is the way that we read that quantum information, interact with that quantum dimension.
And the same rules don't apply there, right?
Right. Whole different set of rules.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we already know this. We just don't know we know it, right? That's
Right. Yeah, we're doing it all naturally, right? And that's the thing. So,
especially when we're children.
right. Yes, 100%. When we're kids, we're very naturally intuitive, and that kind of gets beaten out of us as we get older and we're taught to be sensible. But I think when we recognize that these things, most people have had these sort of intuitive experience a few times in their life, at least. You've had those sort of coincidences or those unexplainable things happening. But the reality is we can get more of that, and we can do more of that when we start to recognize and put our attention and develop it like any other talent or skill, like we would do with our thinking linear mind. We go to school and we do math and we learn to write, right? So there's a whole way to develop the other side of our brain as well. So it's not like we have to do anything or go anywhere. It's all there within us. We just have to learn to understand how to like activate that and open up the flow and get more of it.
Okay. So before we dive into your book a little bit more, I want to take a little side trip and learn more about you and how you landed here, having this intense relationship with intuition.
Yeah, so I think I have 6 planets in Scorpio to begin with. So so there's that. So I am very attuned to intuition and naturally, biologically. But as a child, I grew up with a lot of mysterious happenings. I lived in a haunted house for a while. So from a very early age, I had some of those impossible things happening, and people would tell me it wasn't real. It was just my imagination, and I knew it wasn't. So I think for me, it was a personal journey because I had to prove myself. I'm like, I'm not crazy. I know this stuff happened. I'm not making this up. So part of it for me
I know
was,
the feeling, yeah.
right? Like I needed to reconcile my own reality with all this. So for me, it was a really part of my own spiritual growth and my own journey to go through these things. And as I got older, I ended up having more and more of these experiences. And I think it was really my intuition's way of leading me deeper and keeping me on that investigation. And I was like on the trail of intuition, trying to figure it out, and things would happen and give me more information, and I had to understand it. And all of it sort of led up to this book release, which was really the culmination of everything that I've learned so far coming together. And I wrote the book so other people could have these experiences too. So if, when you read the book, it's an activity book. It's not just a reading book. It's a doing book so that you can personally experience these things yourself.
Right. And you reference in your subtitle 7 keys to unlock your quantum intelligence. Can you pick one of the keys and just sort of give a little glimpse into your world and what you're inviting people to discover about themselves?
Yeah, well, my 2 favorite keys to talk about, because this is one of the things that people like to talk about in podcasts when we start having these conversations, but they're, too much to go into all 7 of them. But
that's why I said pick one. Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, right. So, but I'm going to pick 2. I'm going to start with one, and then I want to say something about the other one because I think they're relevant. So the first key, I think, is really the most important key. And so the keys are sort of a journey. Each one you unlock takes you a little progressively deeper and deeper and deeper into the experience of your intuition. But the first key is the most important. And it's the recognition that a part of you knows everything. This is something I say again and again. A part of you knows everything. And when we actually can affirm that and believe that there's a higher self, a deeper self, a part of us that has access to all the knowledge and wisdom and events and the happenings in all the universe, then we have a space for intuition to open, right? That's an invitation for our intuition to come to us more. We start to believe things, we can get validations. And I'm very much, I'm not like, I have a low woo level on this stuff. Like we do things, we validate them. This isn't pie in the sky stuff. Like we gotta get like reality that these things really happen. And you know what I mean?
Be serious.
Yeah. So recognizing that a part of yourself knows everything is a key shift in the way we think. And it allows us to ultimately experience all of the things I talk about in the book, and then culminating really with the end couple of chapters. And the next to the last chapter is called Impossible Things. And once you start to live by your intuition, you learn that you are capable of impossible things. You yourself can do impossible things, and you can intentionally do them. You don't have to sit around and wait for them to magically happen and wow you here or there. There's things you can do to invite them, to witness them, to get more of them. So what people don't understand about intuition, all of these things that we have heard in the past that have sort of been relegated to the dimension of mystery, things like precognition, remote viewing, psychic ability, prophecy, telepathy, right? You name it, like whatever, like occult or supernatural phenomenon you can think of now relates to current theories in quantum physics. And that's something that's really exciting. So there's things called entanglement. If you don't know what entanglement is, entanglement's really a huge concept that really helped us to understand a lot about intuition. And that's the idea that when two particles, that when they were one, when you separate them, you can move them away. This is on a quantum level, quantum physics particles, put them on different sides of the planet. And when one is activated, the other one still relates to it. They do the same thing. They're still entangled beyond time and space, beyond their location, even if they're not physically in the same space. So this is part of the work that has helped us to understand this quantum field that connects all things. And it's not a field of distance because it's an instantaneous field. It's not like it has to take 3 hours to travel around the planet to get there, right? It's instantaneous, and they're instantaneously connected beyond time and space. And so are we as human beings. So now we can start to understand all of those mysterious phenomenon, these impossible things, as part of entanglement and spooky action at a distance, as Einstein called it, and a number of other ideas in quantum physics. So the 6th chapter really breaks down some of those really cool phenomenon and talks about how they're actually possible and how you can do it. We have a chapter on remote viewing. Most people think they can't remote view, but it is surprisingly easy. And I've been doing it with my students in IntuitionLab for years now. And when people realize that they have access to information outside of the place where they physically are, it blows their mind. But it's the easiest things I do with my students, honestly.
I mean, that sounds impossible, right?
That's
That's
right.
why you titled the chapter that.
Impossible things. Not so impossible anymore.
Can you explain, using quantum theory, why remote viewing is possible? I mean, is it specifically entanglement, or is it something else? What's your understanding of why remote viewing is possible?
Yeah, so how I wrap my brain around it is that, all of the information, everything that exists is stored in this quantum field that connects everyone. So when you look at this sort of ever-present, interconnecting, interpenetrating zero-point field as this sort of sea of communication between all things, and also the storage bank, the cosmic memory of the universe. So it is like, in the old days, people talk about the Akashic records, right? So
right.
Here, I can read the Akashic records, and you go into this hall and you open a book and you read it. And it seems strange, like it's a visualization, but how do they get things that are right sometimes? So there's something to it. Well, I think is that the Akashic records was sort of an old-timey way of describing the Akashic field, which is another word for the quantum field. Because in the old days, with ancient wisdom in the East, they called it the Akasha, was the ether that connected everyone, right? So that's the Akashic field. They had this notion thousands.
Like Akka, yeah.
Just like Akka, right? I think this idea of the field is updating the idea of the Akashic records, because back then, think about it, this was in the 1800s during the spiritualist movement when this idea came into popularity. There weren't computers yet. What did you store information in? The only thing that they had to references were books, right? So the books were how they stored information. So it became a metaphor. So this library, this Akashic hall of books, was really just a visualization, a metaphor for this ever-present data field that stores all of this information. So we're doing the same thing when people visualize going into this library and opening a book. They were really accessing the quantum field is what they were doing. And that's what I think we're doing when we're remote viewing. We're tapping into that, sort of going through the internet to visit that sort of space and time and pulling down bits and bytes of information. And that's another thing that's really important to recognize. So unless you're like really open and really good, and some psychic people are naturally really open, when you do things like that, you'll get bits and bytes because our connection, our internet connection is a little slow. We're a little like rudimentary when it comes to our intuition. Some people
like dial up.
Yeah, we're kind of still at the dial up phase, right? So when we'll get a drop in, it'll usually be like little objects, colors, pieces. It's not like you're going to have some sweeping vision of like every single thing in the room and notice it exactly as it exists, right? Once you get really, really good and you have your intuition advanced, like that's not out of the question for human beings. But I think at our general level, the things that we do in IntuitionLab is like I'll have a target and we'll see if someone can get the target, or people will just look for objects. Like people will randomly identify some strange object that's sitting in my room just because they'll get one little piece, right? They don't see the whole room, right. Or they'll know that I live next to a lake and they'll get that. They're like, there's a lake, there's water around you, things like that, right? So it's stuff that can't be intertwined for this big sweeping, all-encompassing vision. But it's those little pieces of data that once you add it up and you get a bunch of those hits, you're like, whoa, like I just saw like 5 different things that are like in your bedroom. Like that's crazy. And then you start to realize that's beyond coincidence. That's real. And so we do more and more work with that. And it's just the beginning, because then you can move into stuff outside of time, right? So first this is space, but then you can also move into past lives, other lives, future lives, all different kind of stuff, remote viewing time. Because ultimately, like prophecy, think about Nostradamus and the great prophets of history. They were remote viewing the future. That's really what they were doing. They were seeing all that information that was already embedded out there. They were just tapping into and seeing those things. So you can remote view different places, and you can also remote view different times.
Time works differently in the quantum realm, right?
Yes.
Does time exist? I mean, it's
yeah.
That's another question, I guess. But I mean, not another question for a different conversation, I imagine. But
actually, I think it's really important to this conversation, because time is an illusion. It doesn't exist at all independently. It only exists in that we are in this sort of stream of it right now. When we become human beings and live in this reality, we are through relativity, right? We are individual points of consciousness, so there has to be a before and there has to be an after. In this world, we live with the illusion of time, but really everything that's ever happened or will happen or is happening right now is all happening in the eternal now. It's all happened, right? It's all there, and all the possible outcomes. It doesn't mean that we are predestined. We can choose our way through our particular lifetime. Every time we make a choice, we splinter off into a new potentiality. That's one of the things about quantum physics. It's based on potentiality. We can't predict anything. So all of the different options somehow are out there in existence too. So that's when it starts to get a little like mind-blowing. But it works with your intuition to really understand that everything, past, future, everything, everywhere is out there and able to be read by your intuition.
Do you buy into the many worlds theory?
Yeah, I mean, I do. A very smart man, Peter Smith, wrote the foreword to my book, and he wrote a book called Quantum Consciousness, which is another book that really was influential in this work. And I work with him, and he's really big into the idea of alternate realities and parallel universes and all of those sort of concepts, which I think are fascinating. I think it's the only thing that makes sense in terms of giving us our free will, because I do 100% believe that we have choice and we create our own realities. So I think it's the only thing that makes sense, honestly. And with time, I think we'll get a better understanding of it as science evolves and as our intuition evolves, and sort of together we can sort of discover these inner frontiers and make sense of them.
Yeah, it seems like it's been coming up in conversations I've been listening to, different podcasts and stuff, a lot lately. Yep. The whole many worlds concept, where there are many, many versions of you out there who had made different decisions than you had made, the part of you that's listening to this right now.
Yeah.
That's a mind blower.
And Peter, actually, he does, I do some work with him on that, where you explore some of those other realities. He has meditations and stuff that he works with people. And I remember talking with him about I'm like, I don't think I want to know. I was like, I want to know, because either way, it's not good. Like if the other versions of me are doing so much better than me, I'm going to,
I know,
I'm not
You don't want to know
I want to
that.
know that. And if it's worse, then that's just sad. So I'm like, you know what? I don't know. That's all right. I'm just going to
Yeah.
get out there.
But the concept in and of itself invites even more possibility because it's kind of like you can't really screw up
Right.
because it's okay. It's going to be okay no matter what decision you make.
Yes.
I'm very intrigued by the concept of consciousness, and I'm curious about your thoughts about consciousness. I mean, it's a very complex topic. Nobody's really figured out what it is. In your studies of the quantum reality, where do you sit with your understanding of consciousness?
Well, I think it really does come back to the very first thing we talked about in circling back to the beginning of this conversation with the non-local field. So another really cool discovery with the non-local field is understanding that when you start to break down reality, so we understand now that there's no such thing as really as physical objects, right? We understand that our hands, the table, everything we have sitting around us right now are really sort of densifications and manifestations of energy, right? E equals MC squared. We got all that. But what they're really starting to discover now that becomes truly mind-blowing and answers your question is when you break things down far enough. For example, we know we can break down the atom, right? And we can then break down the particles inside the atom. And then we keep breaking these things down. And what we ultimately have gotten to at the end of the road is information. So we're starting to realize now that the world around us isn't built from matter. It's not technically built from energy. It's built from information. The world runs on information.
Mm.
And when you think about that, the implications are huge. Okay. Because what that means is that our reality, we can kind of start to look at this reality as sort of not that we live in a simulation, but it is a sort of manifestation of energy, light, information that's created. And what reads information? Intelligent consciousness. So we live in a mind-made universe. And at the bottom, at the end of this, an information-made universe is a consciousness-made universe. So that what's below it all, underneath it all, we can call it information or we call it energy, but it's really a form of consciousness. Call it God, perhaps, if you are spiritually inclined. But it's one of those ways that you look at life as being really infused in every single thing that's in existence.
That makes a lot of sense. Like I said, this topic interests me greatly, which is one of the reasons why I was excited to talk to you because I thought maybe we could geek out on this a
Yeah,
little
I
bit.
love geeking out.
So in my shamanic practice and also in the framework I was given, like I said, through the Polynesian philosophies and practices, and I am by no means an expert on Hawaiian spiritual practices. What I came to in my years of doing this work is that the shamanic realm is a different focus than the energetic realm, which to me is the quantum realm, and that's the realm of frequency and information and well, information is stored there maybe. I haven't figured that part out yet, but I think like you're saying the Akashic records information is stored. Future, past, present, all of it is there.
Well, so just to interject on that, to put a little framework, what if you think about information as sort of the ground state, and then energy is the excited state of information?
Right, and that's where I was
Okay,
headed.
good. So we're on the same wavelength.
Exactly,
Great.
yeah.
Yes.
So to me, the Dreamtime reality is the realm of symbolism.
Mm.
And so within those symbols, it's a dream,
Yeah.
right? It's the dreaming realm.
Yes.
And to me, that realm is pure consciousness, and it takes many different forms: unconscious, superconscious, conscious,
Mm.
mind,
Yes.
all of that.
Mm-hmm.
So within that realm is intention and intelligence. And so if you have an intention in your consciousness, that intention to me will travel into the quantum realm, the matrix,
Mm-hmm.
and then gather form and shape
Mm-hmm.
and then pop out in the physical as an experience.
Exactly.
That makes sense to you?
Yeah, like it's the manifestation process, right? And that's how we co-create with the universe, right? Because our minds, that's the thing. When you talk about manifestation, it's a big word, law of attraction, secret, all that stuff.
It's also loaded, yeah.
Right. It really is. It really is because we don't do it alone. And there's so much about that really we need to use our intuition more when we do that stuff because we got to be sure we're creating the right things for our soul's path and our journey. But ultimately, whatever we do when we create in the world, we co-create that with the universe in that way that comes from that realm of energy, that realm of information, and then manifests as birth into the world through this process of creation. And it's beautiful, right? And I was talking to Helena Waba about this when I talked with her, interviewed her for the book, and she was talking about how the Big Bang was so important to this, right? Because the Big Bang is what just exploded everything into reality from this realm of pure consciousness. And understanding the world is just this whole sort of like explosion of manifestation that we're participating in when we're uniting our individual consciousness with universal consciousness and creating the world. It's a really cool.
It's the original intention for
Yeah,
this physical universe.
yeah, pretty neat.
Yeah, very cool. All right. Well, thanks for going down that little bit
Yeah,
of a rabbit hole with
it's
me.
good ideas.
Yeah, just, I mean, no one knows, right? I mean, we're all just trying to
Yes,
figure this out because of our large brains and our,
exactly.
well, it's not large brain. My moderate brain is trying to figure this out. So, one of the things I really wanted to hit on with you is how do you work with people to help them discern the difference between true intuitive guidance and wishful thinking?
Yeah, yeah, that's really one of the first things we do when I work with students. And I give like workshops where I start talking about this. And then I really also have deep dives where I work with people over the course of a year, 2 years, because intuition is something that it has to become a part of your life. It's not something that you can just take a class and everything's perfect, right? You got to work it. You got to live it every day of your life. You got to go out there and do it. So I like to just try to arm people with just the basic understanding of what is intuition versus everything else in your brain, right? Because people are like, listen to your inner voice. Well, guess what? We've got a lot of inner voices.
We sure do. Yeah, that's exactly
And
right.
I appreciate the message because they're right. There is one voice in there that we should listen to. And I try to explain that it is still quiet, calm voice of peace and power. And that's key. It's a peaceful voice, but it's also a powerful voice, right? So understanding the sort of qualities of intuition versus our wishful thinking, our emotions, our fears, our desires, our conditioning, our inner critic, right? All of these things are different voices that are going to try and just sort of muck out this true intuitive truth. So intuition, you think about it, what it really is, it's our sort of direct connection to truth. And people are like, oh, what happens when your intuition's wrong? Well, guess what? Your intuition will never be wrong. It is impossible.
Yeah, then you didn't connect it.
Right. Intuition is synonymous with truth, so it can't be wrong. What's wrong is right that we misinterpret something, or maybe we judged it too soon. Sometimes intuition will take us on a curvy path, and that thing that we thought we had to do, we might fail at it because it's going to take us to the next thing that's the right thing. We might think, oh, we shouldn't have followed our intuition, but then just keep going, and then down the road, you're like, oh, I see, my intuition had it all worked out. So we have to learn to get into a state of trust with our true inner voice once we recognize it, and just keep following it step by step by step. And when we live in trust with ourselves and the universe, our lives start to fall in place and things align and we live with ease, right? So we have to quiet those emotions. Our emotions are the number one sort of inhibitor to our intuition. If you have feelings around something like emotional feelings, it's probably not your intuition, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's something that from peace and power.
Yeah, I've often thought that if there's emotions attached to it, then it probably isn't an intuition.
Yeah, so it can be a motive, right? So you can have an intuition, you're like, oh my gosh, I just have a feeling about, you have a kid off at school and you just have a feeling, you're like, I need to go check on my kid. Something's up. You could feel moved to go do something. Or you could be like, oh, I have to go start this new business because I'm so moved to go do it, right? It moves us.
Yeah, but
Emotional.
it's neutral at first, and then you have an emotional
Yeah.
reaction to it. Like, need to check on my kid. Oh shit, what happened to my kid? Like, that is right on the tail of that.
Right, right. That's a different thing. When you get into the emotion part, half the time though, when I've had these experiences, right? Like I've had like my intuition's kicked in and I'm just like going. You hear stories of people, they're not even thinking about their feelings. You just get into a mode where you're just doing something. You're just moved to go do it. And it's not even about having like, oh, I'm so worried, or you're not doing any of that stuff, right? You just have a purpose and you're going and you're doing it. So it moves us. And then, of course, we have a human experience of feelings around that at some point, right? And that's just sort of when our regular mind kicks in. But the intuitive part of it is just empowering, but it comes from that calm place of peace and power.
Meaning that you have to get rid of all the noise inside of you, which is of tall order for many of us.
Yes.
We're pretty noisy. And the whole world is noisy right now. A lot of us are in distress, high degrees of distress. Chaos abides.
That's why we need intuition now more than ever. And that's what I keep saying. I'm like, if we could just get back to our intuition, we'd all just stop, get off this hamster wheel and just enjoy life a little bit, you know?
But what you're saying, though, is it's a discipline. And so you have to stick with it in order to really to tap into it. And then once you do, it makes your life magical. But your life is supposed to be magical. It's just like you're inherently a magical being.
Yes.
And you just have to get out of your own way. Easier said than done, but that's why it's a practice.
Yeah, because we shut that down. I mean, you see how children are. They live in a world of magic and wonder. They can play with themselves in the backyard for hours, right? We shut that down as we get older. But once we finally were like, wait a second, why do we do that? Life was great. We need to come back as adults now and bring more of that magic back in.
Yes, please. How do you work with folks? I mean, besides your books, you have 3 books you mentioned.
Yeah. So in 2017, I started IntuitionLab. I left my previous career in the arts and technology, and went full time into teaching intuition. That was my sort of big risk that my intuition was drawing me to. Was like going to go all in, and I did it. And I've been doing that for the past how many years now. And IntuitionLab has really developed into this sort of beautiful experience where I get the chance to work with people to really help them personally bring their intuition into their life. And the key to it is it's a community where we work with other people. So one of the things I realized when I was coming up in the intuition development world is one of the best ways to develop your intuition is to practice it with other people. Because we're living our daily lives, it's especially hard to tell our intuition because we know ourselves so well, right? So if we have this intuition to go do something, we think, oh yeah, it's probably my intuition, but like, I could have come up with that on my own, theoretically, right? So you don't know for sure. But so what we do in IntuitionLab is I have created this whole ecosystem around partnering with people, creating insight circles, doing intuition exchanges, where you do this for other people. And when I sit down with you and I tell you that you're going to be doing this great speaking engagement in some place, I have this feeling that you're going to be doing this, and then it comes true. There's no way that I could have known that because I don't know you, right? Or if I say something about a relative that you have, and there's no way I would know. So when you practice with other people, you get those really big hits, right? So that you realize, oh, there's no way I could have
There's
known
nothing
that.
attached. You have no skin in the game.
Yes, no skin in the game. And that is the truth because we don't want to know. Sometimes we want things to be a certain way in our own lives. And so we can't see that intuition telling us. Yeah, a lot. I hear you. I have the same issues. It's always a struggle.
I think it's a universal kind of thing.
Yes. Even when you have your intuition highly developed, you're still going to be faced with those situations where you're challenged to trust it. That's sort of the walk of life, right? Is learning to live and trust yourself and the universe. And that's sort of the more we do that, the happier we'll be.
All right. So how are your courses structured?
Yeah. So like I said, I have like quarterly classes if you're just curious and you want to just take a quarterly class. And we have some that are for independent study if you just kind of want to see what it's all about. My favorite course is the Sacred Guide program. And that's the 1-year course that we have where we have a group of anywhere between 20 to 40 people, depending on the year. We're getting pretty large now. I'm probably going to have to I think 40 is as big as I want to go. It's a lot. It's a lot to manage. So I'm probably going to make it a little smaller in the future. But then we work together and through different quarterly classes where we learn to awaken our intuition first. So I go through in January the class where we talk about attuning our intuitive pathways. So talking about how we connect to the quantum field and opening up those pathways, getting into the stillness, getting more of our intuition, learning to recognize what intuition is and what it isn't, right? And start to practice sharing with other people, getting validations, because we have to learn to trust our intuition. And if we don't ever get our intuition right, we don't experience our intuition, we're not going to trust it fully. So giving people an opportunity to learn to trust their intuition by practicing and by getting validations with other people and using my insight card deck, which is such a fun tool. So I designed them myself. I created these. These were one of the plans I hatched with my very first book, The Psychic Workshop. I dreamed of doing these cards because I thought the mind really works with visuals when it comes to intuition. It helps us to speak and interpret intuitive messages much easier. So we use the insight cards to help us to sort of decode our intuition and learn how our intuition works and works within ourselves, because everyone's intuition is different, unique. We're all wired in a different way to have different pathways that are more open than others. So we work on that first, and then we sort of, in the spring class, get into I call it inner magic. And that's when we start talking about the quantum stuff and witnessing synchronicities in our life and trying remote viewing and doing all those really cool stuff. And then over the summer, we do an inner retreat and do like all kind of beautiful, like contemplative practices and meditations. And then we wrap the year up in the fall with a course called Higher Powers, which is where we do all the impossible things. And that's sort of the crescendo. And we try all these really cool stuff that say we should be impossible to do. It's great. They love it. The one thing they say time and again is it changes the way that I view my life. Like you just don't live your life the same way anymore.
How could you?
Yeah.
Right? After you've had direct experience of successful intuitive hits.
Yep.
You can't be the same.
No.
This sounds really fun.
I love it. I've been doing it now for all these years. I love that, like, my students last year, every single person that was in the first year class went to the second year. So I was like, well, that's good validation.
Yeah, you're onto something.
Yeah.
Definitely. That's awesome. Yeah.
So I think it's something that's really starting to resonate with people. And I just keep sort of, it changes a little every year because I'm still learning. I'm still moving forward. And every time I learn something new, I bring it in. And so we're sort of co-creators, and we do things like past life masterminds, or we get each other's past lives. And this year was amazing. We had people, each group, we had like 4 different groups, and each group had different people who brought through the same life for the same person, described the same life, people who never even, like, barely even knew each other. This is just like happening over and over again. And it's like, you can't make this stuff up. It's
right. It's powerful. Yeah, no shit. Yeah.
So it's a lot of fun.
All right. Well, how do folks find you?
Yeah, you can visit me on my website, kimchestney.com, where I have the free insight card deck if you want to get there and start practicing with your intuition. I have an interactive card deck that you can play with 24/7. It's always up. And I also have some free downloadable decks there too. And you can also learn more about the classes and workshop at intuition-lab.com. We call it a lab because it's where we go to experiment and explore.
Love experiments.
Yeah.
Well, Kim, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me. This was fun.
This was a great conversation. So thanks for all your good ideas and deep questions. I love it.
Developing your intuition can streamline your life and make it feel more magical. And since those insights are floating out there just waiting for you to perceive them, why not take advantage of your gifts? If you'd like to learn more about Kim, her books, or to enroll in one of her classes, please visit intuition-lab.com or kimchestney.com. I've included links in the show notes for both websites. Thank you so much for listening, for your amazing feedback about the show, and for being a Lucid Cafe spread the word helper. I really appreciate it. I'll be back in a few weeks with another episode. Until next time.